Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway sits on $325 billion in cash, representing the largest cash position in the company's history. And this isn't portfolio diversification, but a warning signal because the most famous, long-term investor in the world cannot find anything worth buying at current prices. Corporate insiders are selling their own company's stock at ratios exceeding 25 to 1, compared to buying, while private equity firms have dramatically slowed commercial real estate purchases, and family offices managing billionaire wealth have increased cash allocations to the highest levels since 2008. The smart money isn't rotating into different assets, but exiting the system entirely. And this exact positioning preceded both 1929 and 2008, where the wealthy moved to cash months before the crash, while everyone else was still celebrating permanent prosperity. But this time something unprecedented is happening, because instead of one bubble like 1929's stock market, or two bubbles like 2008's housing and credit, three massive bubbles are inflating simultaneously, including stocks and real estate and government debt. And when these three detonate together, the collapse will eclipse anything in living memory. Before we continue, though, understanding how financial collapses unfold through interconnected bubbles rather than single asset failures diverges sharply from mainstream financial media narratives. Real crisis analysis requires studying these systemic cascades, so hit that subscribe button because it helps the channel, and these wealth transfer patterns need exposing. Drop a comment too, because I want knowing if you think the three bubble scenario is alarmist fear-mongering or legitimate pattern recognition. Every financial collapse in history has followed the same 5-stage sequence, where the most dangerous part isn't the crash itself, but the period just before, when everything appears fine and experts insist the fundamentals are strong. Economists call this the zone of complacency, and America has been living in it for years. In 1926, Florida real estate collapsed, where land worth millions became worthless overnight, as a Category 4 hurricane revealed that half the land being sold was literally underwater, not from the storm, but because it was swamp that had always been swamp. $1 billion in real estate value evaporated, representing roughly $18 billion today. But newspapers called it a regional problem, while the national economy was fine, they said. By October 1929, over 600 banks had already collapsed before Black Tuesday and before anyone admitted there was a problem. In summer 1929, stock prices had risen to levels bearing no relationship to actual corporate earnings, where the price-to-earnings ratio had reached extremes never before recorded. But Irving Fisher, the most famous economist in America, declared that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau. The market wasn't overvalued, he explained, but had simply evolved, where new technologies like radio and automobiles had created permanent prosperity, and the old rules no longer applied. 17 days later, the stock market crashed, and the denial phase is seductive because the experts sound knowledgeable, and everyone wants to believe them because the alternative is terrifying. In 2008, it was subprime mortgages representing 3% of the total mortgage market, where when concerns first emerged in 2007, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke told Congress the impact on the broader economy seems likely to be contained, while Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson said he didn't see subprime mortgage market troubles imposing a serious problem. What they missed was interconnection, where those subprime mortgages had been sliced and packaged and sold as securities to banks around the world and used as collateral for other loans, and 3% of the market brought the world economy to its knees. Right now, analysts watch the stock market, but not the $1.2 trillion in commercial real estate loans coming due in 18 months, or the Japanese bond market, where a century of monetary policy is unraveling. In October 1929, the Dow fell 25% in 2 days, but over 3 years fell 89% from its peak, where an investor who had $1 million in stocks in September 1929 had $110,000 by July 1932. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy Monday, and by Friday, money market funds were breaking the buck, something that had never happened before. And the global financial system came within hours of complete seizure, where ATMs were days away from running dry. After 1929, wealthy families who exited before the crash, including the Kennedys and the Baruchs, bought assets at pennies on the dollar, emerging richer. And after 2008 institutional investors bought 200,000 foreclosed homes, becoming landlords to the families who lost them. The new reality isn't just about money, but about generational scarring, where studies of people who graduated into the 2008 recession show they earned less over their entire careers compared to those who graduated just a few years earlier. Right now, America is between stage 2 and stage 3, where the cracks are visible and denial is active and the trigger is already in place. 3 massive bubbles are inflating simultaneously, and when these burst, the damage will exceed anything we've experienced, not because each bubble is bigger than before, but because all 3 are interconnected, where when one goes, they all go together. The CAPE ratio compares stock prices to average corporate earnings over 10 years adjusted for inflation, where the historical average is around 17. In September 1929, it reached 33, and in October 2007, it reached 28. But right now, the CAPE ratio is above 35, making it one of the highest readings in over 150 years of recorded data. The market's gains have been concentrated in 7 companies, including Apple and Microsoft and Nvidia and Amazon and Google and Meta and Tesla, representing roughly 30% of the S&P 500's market capitalization, where when you strip out these 7 stocks, the rest of the market has barely moved. The market stands on 7 legs instead of 500, where if any stumble, the entire index falls, and while retail investors pour money in, where household ownership of stocks has reached record highs and margin debt has surged to over $750 billion. The smart money is leaving where insider selling has reached 25-to-1 ratios. Adjusted for inflation, housing prices today are approximately 40% higher than the 2006 bubble peak that caused the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Mortgage rates went from 3% in 2021 to over 7% in 2023, where monthly payments nearly doubled, but prices didn't fall because homeowners with 3% mortgages refused to sell. This is the scissor effect, where the blades are spreading apart because interest rates are high and prices are high and something has to give. And when the scissor closes, it will cut where either rates come down significantly or prices come down significantly. The housing bubble connects to consumer debt, where total household debt has surpassed $17.5 trillion, including credit card debt exceeding $1.1 trillion and auto loans exceeding $1.6 trillion. And credit card delinquency rates have reached their highest level in 12 years, where more than 3.5% of balances are now seriously delinquent. This is happening while unemployment is supposedly low and the economy is supposedly strong, meaning consumers are falling behind during the good times. The national debt has surpassed $36 trillion, where in 1980, the national debt was less than $1 trillion, taking the country over 200 years to accumulate that first trillion. And it now takes approximately 100 days to add another trillion. The debt to GDP ratio now exceeds 120%, where the last time it was this high was 1946, immediately after World War II. But in 1946, the debt had been accumulated to defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, while this time there's no war and no emergency. Interest payments are approaching $1 trillion per year, representing just interest, not paying down principal. Where to put that in perspective, the entire defense budget is roughly $800 billion, and interest payments now exceed defense spending. The government is borrowing money specifically to pay interest on money it previously borrowed, representing the textbook definition of a debt spiral, and there are only 4 ways out. Grow your way out, cut spending dramatically, raise taxes dramatically, or inflate the debt away, where the 4th option is the path of least resistance, and it's the path that destroys the middle class. Each bubble makes the others worse, where if stocks crash, consumer wealth evaporates, and spending collapses, and government must borrow, more worsening the debt spiral. And if housing crashes, banks take massive losses, and credit freezes, and government must borrow, more worsening the debt spiral. If the debt spiral accelerates government prints money, where inflation erodes real estate values and interest rates spike, crushing stock valuations, and everything falls at once because these bubbles aren't parallel but intertwined, where they form a system. And when the system breaks, it breaks everywhere simultaneously. Joseph Kennedy Sr. made his fortune during the Roaring Twenties, but in summer 1929 started selling where the market was at all-time highs and everyone was bullish, but Kennedy was quietly converting to cash. The famous story is that Kennedy decided to sell after a shoe shine boy gave him stock tips where when unsophisticated investors become convinced the market only goes up, you're near the top, and Kennedy sold his stocks months before the October crash, while millions lost everything. But Kennedy didn't stop there, where after moving to cash, he converted a significant portion of his wealth to gold, because he understood that if the financial system broke down, paper claims might become worthless, but gold would not. And then came the third move, where Kennedy established short positions in the stock market. When the crash came in October, Kennedy's short positions exploded in value, making him millions while everyone else was being wiped out. And after the crash, Kennedy used preserved capital to buy assets at collapsed prices, where the Kennedy fortune, that funded a president and 2 senators, was built on the wreckage of the Great Depression. In 2005, Michael Burry concluded the subprime mortgage market was a house of cards where the loans being made were designed to fail and the borrowers couldn't afford them, and the only way they worked was if housing prices rose forever. Burry worked with Goldman Sachs and other banks to create credit default swaps on mortgage bonds where these were essentially insurance contracts, and he paid premiums for 2 years while the housing market kept rising and his investors were furious. In 2007 and 2008, the housing market collapsed, and the bonds Burry had bet against became worthless, where his credit default swaps paid off spectacularly, and his fund made over $700 million while he personally made over $100 million. 3 trades every time, exit positions, and preserve capital, and bet on the collapse. And the pattern never changes where only the instruments do. Over $1.2 trillion in commercial real estate loans come due in 18 months, where these loans were made when rates were near zero and they're maturing into an environment where rates have tripled. Consider an office building worth $100 million in 2021, where the owner borrowed $70 million at 3.5% with monthly payment roughly $315,000, and that same loan today at 7.5% brings monthly payment roughly $490,000, representing a 55% increase in debt service costs. But it gets worse because that building isn't worth $100 million anymore, where office vacancy rates have reached historic highs, including San Francisco, 35% vacant, and Manhattan, 22% vacant, and Chicago, 25% vacant. The work-from-home revolution didn't reverse where companies that promised employees they could work remotely aren't forcing them back. And empty buildings don't generate rent, while buildings that can't service debt get handed back to banks. Regional banks have enormous exposure where commercial real estate loans represent 30 to 40% of total assets in some cases. And when loans go bad, banks take massive losses. And when banks take massive losses, they stop lending. And when banks stop lending, the economy freezes. This is exactly what happened with subprime in 2008, where a contained problem in one sector infected the entire financial system, and commercial real estate is larger than subprime was, and almost nobody is talking about it. After every crash, the prepared and the wealthy and the connected buy assets from the desperate at collapsed prices, where the foreclosed home sells for half what it's worth to an investor with cash, and the bankrupted business sells its equipment for pennies on the dollar. After 1929, the wealth distributed across millions of middle-class investors was concentrated into a few thousand hands, building the Kennedy fortune and the Rockefeller expansion and the foundation of dynastic wealth that persists today. After 2008, institutional investors bought 200,000 single-family homes, becoming landlords to families who lost them, where Invitation Homes and Blackstone made billions while former homeowners paid rent. And the coming crash will be the greatest wealth transfer in American history. Collapses don't destroy wealth, but transfer it where money doesn't disappear and houses still exist and factories still stand, but what changes is who owns them. Military overextension. The United States maintains 750 bases in 80 countries, spending over $800 billion annually more than the next 10 countries combined. And yet, military strategists openly admit we cannot respond to simultaneous conflicts on multiple fronts. Currency debasement. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971, when Nixon severed the last link to gold, and since 2020 alone, the Federal Reserve has created more than $6 trillion out of thin air. Debt spiral. The government borrows money specifically to pay interest on money it previously borrowed, where interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year, representing the textbook definition of fiscal death. Loss of productive capacity. America no longer manufactures what it consumes, where the trade deficit runs in the hundreds of billions, and essential goods, including 80% of pharmaceutical ingredients and critical military components, are manufactured overseas, primarily in China. Social decay. Trust in institutions has collapsed to historic lows, and life expectancy is declining for the first time since the Spanish flu pandemic, where drug overdoses kill more Americans annually than car accidents and gun violence and homicides combined. 5 warning signs, every single one confirmed, and the only stages remaining are loss of reserve currency status and final collapse, where BRICS nations build alternatives to the dollar and central banks worldwide buy gold at record rates. Thanks for watching. Here's what I want. Knowing from you, though. If the smart money pattern shows billionaires moving to cash at record levels, while corporate insiders sell at 25-to-1 ratios, and Warren Buffett sits on $325 billion refusing to buy anything at current prices, is this legitimate evidence that informed investors see a crash coming, or is it just coincidental positioning that bears misinterpret as a warning signal? That distinction determines whether pattern recognition is a valid predictive tool, or whether each cycle is actually different enough that historical patterns become meaningless. So drop your take in the comments, because I genuinely want hearing whether you think the smart money exits are a reliable leading indicator, or whether this time truly could be different despite the parallels. The window is closing, and there is still time to prepare, but that window will not stay open forever, where it will close suddenly without warning the way it always does.